Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Siri Vaith, Executive Director of CFRI, Cystic Fibrosis Research, and it is my honor to be here and welcome you to the fourth in our four-part series on financial planning for the CF and rare disease community. As I've said in the other ones, but in case this is your first, the impetus for this program was the shift for many of adults with CF in healthcare due to new therapies that for the first time has allowed many adults with CF to think about future plans. And with this, there's great celebration, but there is also a great deal of stress because there are some people who feel ill-prepared for a financial security in their future. So we are really happy to have this four-part series and try to address many different strategies for financial planning. And as always, we are very grateful to Global Genes, who provided us with the Financial Advocacy Rare Impact Patient Grant to support this webinar. And so at any time during the presentation, after I introduce Kirsten Howe, you can type your questions in the Q&A box as you think. And you may note there's a chat box and a Q&A box. If you could try and stay with the Q&A, that would be very helpful. And she will wonderfully answer all these questions at the end. And as always, I do want to remind people that these are strategies discussed. They are, before you make any big changes in your financial plans, please consult with somebody in your area because there might be differences from state to state. So with that, we get to move on to the substance. And I am so honored to be joined today by Kirsten Howe. Kirsten is a highly ranked estate planning attorney in the San Francisco Bay Area. Apparently, she began her law career as a business planning attorney, but soon realized estate planning and elder law were her true passions. She has extensive expertise in estate planning, trust administration, Medi-Cal planning, probate, retirement asset planning, able accounts, and special needs planning. We are so honored that she is sharing her incredible expertise with us today. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you very much, Siri. That was a lovely introduction. Thank you for that. Almost as if I'd written it myself. And thank you all for inviting me here to speak to you today. I'm quite honored. As Siri said, go ahead and type any questions that you may have for me in the Q&A section, and I will answer them at the end. So we are starting out, we're talking about special needs planning. There we go. Okay. So in order to talk about special needs planning, we've got to talk about what is special needs planning and why do we do it. We're going to talk about government benefits that are available for disabled people. We are going to also discuss how private money impacts those government benefits, because that's where the planning comes in. And then we're going to talk about special needs trusts. We have to get through all those other things to get to our main topic, which is special needs trusts. So what is special needs planning? It is planning for the care and support of a disabled person, someone whose disability prevents them from being able to support themselves or possibly care for themselves. And this planning necessarily requires that we look at financial planning and we look at care planning. But what I'm talking about primarily is the legal planning because I am a lawyer, but I cannot avoid touching on those other two topics because they're all kind of intertwined in the special needs planning world. All right, so someone who is unable to work and support themselves needs to rely on other resources, and those resources tend to fall into three major categories. First, we have the unpaid family and friends. Often that starts out as parents caring for their disabled child, just the same way they would care for a child who's not disabled. Parents provide room and board. Parents pay for everything. Parents drive their kids everywhere. Parents do it all. And the parents will very often continue providing this kind of support unpaid, even as their disabled children become adults. And honestly, even as their non-disabled children become adults. I know a lot of us have adult children who've come back home after college and a job. But it's this unpaid family support that is kind of where we start out when we have a disabled person in the family. And it can, as I say, continue with a disabled person into adulthood. And it can become, honestly, a full-time job, depending on the disability, the level of disability, the type of disability. So all of those things are what parents typically do for their children. And special needs planning is about figuring out how those things will get done, even if the parents aren't around anymore. We don't have family members who are available to pump money into the situation or to provide unpaid care. After all, you know, parents get old, parents become disabled themselves. Eventually, all the parents in the room, we are going to die. And so special needs planning is figuring out how are we going to deal with that? What can we do to make sure that the disabled person is supported and is cared for and is able to live the best life possible? So that's kind of the theme. You're going to hear me say that sentence I just said multiple times throughout this session. And I just want to, as an aside, I'm going to point out that in my experience, very often when we meet for the first time with clients who have a child who is disabled, and when I say child, I could be talking about an adult child. I just mean there's a parent-child relationship. I don't necessarily mean a minor. But clients who have a child who's disabled, often they will say that their plan for when they die is simply to have one of their other children take over all of those responsibilities, take over the care and the support of the disabled child. And I'm getting up on my soapbox a little bit. I won't do that again in this presentation, but this is something I feel pretty strongly about. That is not a good plan. You know, I have this plan. My plan is I gave birth to the plan. It's the other sibling. Our children have their own lives. They have careers. They have their own families. And that's what we want for all of our children. And trying to juggle all of that and also take care of your brother or sister for the rest of your life is not a good plan. And it's not what parents want for their children. I have a podcast, which I'll give you my website at the end, and you can access my podcast episodes if you're interested. But one of the episodes I did a couple of years ago was I was talking to a gentleman who is he happens to be a financial planner, but we were talking about his personal experience with caring for his adult Down syndrome sister. He became the primary care provider for her. He had primary responsibility for her, and how that impacted his life. It's really a compelling story. It's a fascinating episode. If you're interested, his name is Bob McClellan, and you can go and look for that episode on my website, which I'll share with you in a little bit. That's just a little aside. So if that's your plan to care for your disabled child by having their sibling take all the responsibility, I suggest you consider that again. Okay, off the soapbox, on we go. So what are the other options? Well, we have paid providers that we can pay people to do all these things that the parents, I'm going to call them the parents, would normally do. And that requires private money. Now, it's not my job to figure out where are we going to get that private money. That's a financial planner's job. But my job is to figure out how to make the best use of that private money that we have. So we could have private money providing all the care and all the support that the parents normally would provide. The other alternative is government benefits. And we're going to talk about in much more detail government benefits in a little bit. But this slide right here is really the heart of special needs planning. How do we make these three sources of support and care work together to make sure the disabled person is fully cared for, fully supported, and lives the best possible life? So the best solution is usually a combination of these three things. All right, finally, we get to switch slides. So let's focus on the government benefits aspect. And this is going to get a little technical, maybe. I'll try to keep it as untechnical as I can for you, but you got to bear with me because we cannot talk about special needs planning without understanding the government benefits. If we weren't worried about government benefits, it wouldn't be special needs planning. It would just be estate planning, which is also important. Okay, so the government benefits that a disabled person is eligible for generally fall into a couple of different categories, two different categories. We have needs-based benefits, and then we have entitlement benefits, entitlement-based benefits. And I'm going to talk about the entitlement benefits first because we're really not going to spend much time on them. I just want to get them out of the way quickly. Entitlement means that because you are a member of a certain class of people, you get this benefit regardless of how much money you have, regardless of how much income you have, regardless of your financial situation. You're a member of this class, so you get this benefit. So a common benefit in this category is Social Security Disability, SSD, or sometimes we call it SSDI, Social Security Disability Income. How do you get into that class? Well, you have to be disabled, and this is true for all of these benefits. You have to be disabled, and by that I mean you have to meet the Social Security standard of disability. And you have to have had a job and paid into Social Security. So this is typically not a benefit that we pay too much attention to because there's no planning we can do to make you eligible for that. Either you had a job and you paid into Social Security or you didn't. I can't help you with legal planning to change those facts. Another benefit similar to that is the childhood disability benefit. And this is for the children of people who have had a job and paid into Social Security. Again, there's not really a planning opportunity. You either are in that category or you're not. If you're eligible for that benefit, that's great, let's get it. But we can't plan for getting it. And then the one benefit that we're all very familiar with, which is an entitlement benefit, is Medicare. And how do you get that? You get that by turning 65. If you've paid into Social Security over the course of your lifetime and you're 65, you are eligible for Medicare. There are a few other categories of people who can receive Medicare. But again, it's an entitlement benefit. I can't help you become eligible for it. Either you are or you aren't. What we're going to focus on is the needs-based benefits. And there, what we're talking about are benefits that, yes, you have to be disabled, but you also have to have a financial need. And that's why we call it needs-based. Okay, I'm going to flip my outline. So those two benefits are SSI, Supplemental Security Income. And I put Medi-Cal because I'm in California. If you're anywhere other than California, you're going to call it Medicaid. But here in California, we're special. So we have a special name for everything. Whenever you see Medi-Cal on these slides, just think Medicaid and think about me here in California. Okay, so what are these benefits? Medi-Cal, or Medicaid, is a joint federal and state program that pays for the medical care of people with limited income and limited resources, limited assets. People with financial need get Medicaid or Medi-Cal to pay for their health care. SSI is a federal benefit. It's a monthly cash benefit to people, generally speaking, who are disabled. We don't need to focus on the over 65. In this context, we're talking about people who are disabled and who have limited income and limited financial resources. Now, the SSI is it's a small monthly cash benefit. It's very it's designed to pay for food and shelter, and that's all. And as we're going to see in a minute, it's really a very subsistence level benefit. It's not a lot of money, but it is very important for disabled people, because if you are eligible for SSI, even $1, if your SSI benefit is $1 a month, as long as you're eligible, you are also eligible automatically for Medicaid. All right. So oftentimes this planning that we're doing, SSI is nice, but really we're keeping our eye on that prize of getting our medical care paid for. And if I accidentally slip and call it Medi-Cal when you're thinking, why doesn't she just call it Medicaid? I apologize, but it's what I'm used to saying. Okay, so let's talk specifically about SSI. As I said, I made this into a slide because it's memorable. It's important to keep your eye on that. Medicaid is usually the benefit that's the most important. SSI is great. We want it. We'll take it. But much more value to most clients is getting help with paying for healthcare. You can imagine if you're paying for the whole lifetime of you or your child, if your child is disabled, paying for health insurance privately, paying for all the co-pays, paying for all the labs, paying for everything, that's a lot of money. And if you can get some assistance from the government, that's a big benefit. All right, so how do we become eligible for SSI? Well, as I said, we're talking about disability. So first and foremost, you've got to be disabled under the Social Security definition of disability. The second is you have to have resources that are low enough. You have to qualify on resources. Remember, I said this is a needs-based benefit. The resources, generally speaking, that you are allowed to have is a home, a car, and $2,000. Now, there are some other things, but for purposes of keeping this discussion moving, those are the important ones. Those are the big ones. That's what we focus on. And I'm not going to bore you with any of the other details. So that's the resource limitation or the asset limitation. The second limitation is income. So remember, SSI is meant for people who are of low income, low resources. Your income has to be low. This slide, again, is about California because that's where I am and that's what I know. Every state is different. The SSI benefit is a little bit different in every state. There's a standard federal benefit, and then some states will increase that. They'll put a little bit more into the monthly benefit. And in California, they do. Our monthly benefit is a little bit higher than some other states. This slide assumes that the income is zero. So if your income is zero in California and you're eligible for SSI, your monthly SSI benefit will be $943.72. In your state, it'll be different, but it's in that range. California has a pretty high benefit. There's no state where SSI is a huge monthly benefit, so you can use this as an approximation. Okay, so now remember that SSI is meant to pay for food and shelter, and that's it. So you can do the math in your head. If you know, most of you probably don't live in the Bay Area here in California. That's where I live. I know what I pay for groceries every month, and I know that I couldn't also pay rent and pay for my groceries on $943.72. So SSI is a very subsistence level benefit. Fortunately, in our country, we have a federal policy that favors disabled people. We have all kinds of things happening in our country that don't favor disabled people, but we do have some policies that are somewhat favorable. The policy is, again, designed to make sure that disabled people are fully supported, fully cared for, and living their best lives possible. So it's because of that federal policy that we find planning opportunities in the world of SSI and special needs trusts. It creates the ability for us to combine that private money with the government benefit. Okay, so I know you're now thinking, what is she talking about? I don't understand. She's going around in circles. Just hang in there. We're gonna get there. Okay, so remember I said the maximum benefit under SSI is a monthly cash benefit. It assumes you have no income. Your benefit is going to go down if you have income. So now we have to talk about income. You have to understand income on a very high general level. I'm going to walk you through it. It's not scary. Under SSI, there are 3 kinds of income, and you can see them up here on the screen. The first 2, unearned and earned, are pretty straightforward and pretty familiar to most of us, I think. Unearned income, generally speaking, is money that you didn't earn, money that just comes to you somehow. So the most common example is interest that your money earns. When your money earns money, that's unearned income. You didn't earn it, your money earned it. So interest on a bank account, dividends on some stock that you might own. That's unearned income as we all understand it in the context of filing our income tax returns every year. So the IRS and SSI are in line on this type of unearned income. Where SSI is different, however, is SSI considers any income that you didn't earn, any cash income that you didn't earn, to be unearned income. For example, if a person on SSI goes to their grandmother and says, "Grandma, I really want to buy a new pair of shoes. Can you give me $100?" And Grandma gives them $100, that is considered unearned income by SSI. The IRS would consider that a gift, and you and I would consider that a gift. But under SSI, that is considered unearned income, and it's important. That's an important point. So under SSI, we have unearned income. We also have earned income, and you all understand what earned income is. It's what you earn from a job, right? So earned income is treated a little bit differently from unearned income, but similarly. Unearned income, back to the gifts and the dividends and the interest, if you earn unearned income, SSI will allow you to keep the first $20 every month. You get to keep that. But after that, your SSI benefit gets reduced dollar for dollar. So every dollar of unearned income above $20 that you make in a month, your SSI benefit goes down $1. On the contrary, with unearned income, you get to keep the first $65. So that's a little more generous. And after that, your benefit only goes down $1 for every $2 of earned income. So you can see they're a little more generous with allowing the SSI recipient to keep their wages, their salary. And why is that? Well, we got to go back to that overarching federal policy in favor of making sure that disabled people are cared for, supported, and living the best life possible. We all want to be productive. We all want to have a purpose. And if you are disabled, but you are able to have a job and you want to have a job, that should be permitted, because that's part of living the best life possible. So that's why those two types of income are treated a little bit differently. For these two types of income, unearned and earned, one really important point to keep in mind, as I said, the benefit gets decreased. Your SSI monthly payment goes down if you have these types of income, and your SSI monthly benefit could go down to zero. If you have enough income, it could go down to zero. And why is that important? Well, because remember, oftentimes the thing that we really care about is getting our health care paid for. We are focused on Medi-Cal, Medicaid. We might not be so excited, we might not care so much if our SSI benefit goes down, but we care a lot if it goes down to zero, because then we lose our health care coverage. All right, so the third type of income under SSI, remember, we're just focused on SSI. It may not be the most important benefit, except that it leads to Medicaid. The third type of income is called in-kind support and maintenance. In-kind support and maintenance. So what does that mean? It's something that you and I would not consider to be income at all. But in this context, Social Security does consider it to be income. And that is when somebody else, not the SSI recipient, somebody else pays for the things that SSI is supposed to pay for. And what is that? Food and shelter. Somebody else pays for your grocery bill. Somebody else pays your rent. That's considered in-kind support and maintenance. Even though you never got that money, they didn't give you the money to pay your rent. They just paid your rent. That's why it's called in-kind. No cash changed hands. The SSI recipient never received the money, but it's considered income. And because it's income, it reduces the SSI benefit. Now, so let's go back to my original premise where we have the parents are providing the support to the disabled person. And as I said, free room and board. Okay, so that free room and board is considered in-kind support and maintenance. And as I said, in where I live, that SSI benefit of $943.72 would not cover room and board in the Bay Area in California. So that benefit, the in-kind support and maintenance, is greater than the amount of my SSI benefit. But fortunately, because we have this federal policy in favor of supporting disabled people, making sure they're cared for, making sure they live their best lives possible, the in-kind support and maintenance does not reduce the SSI benefit dollar for dollar. Okay, it reduces it dollar for dollar, but only to a maximum reduction of $281 in this year, 2020. That will change next year. Okay, so what do I mean? If we have somebody else paying our rent, even if the rent is $3,000 a month, we're not going to lose our SSI. We will still have whatever the amount is minus $281. Okay, so what is that telling us? That tells us really that the federal government acknowledges that SSI is very much a subsistence level benefit. And if we can find other ways to provide a better life by paying the rent, then that's what we want. The federal government wants to support that. The federal government wants to incentivize that or to allow that. Okay, so now you have a little bit of background on special needs or SSI, and a little bit on Medicaid. That's, again, not as important. We're really focused on the SSI. So we got to talk about preserving government benefits as the that's the why of special needs planning. That's why we do it, is to enable us to have this money and preserve the benefits. But before we get into actually how a special needs trust works, I've got to talk to you about the different kinds of special needs trusts. There are two basic kinds of special needs trusts, and it's important to understand them. The first party special needs trust and the third party special needs trust. The first party special needs trust, well, let me talk about the third party special needs trust first. This is the kind of special needs trust we use when we're doing planning. We're planning ahead, we're being proactive. We want to make sure that everything's in order, everything's in place. That is a third party special needs trust, because our typical scenario is we have parents who are planning for what happens if they die, and they are using their money to set up a trust for the benefit of a child. Could be an adult child, but a child. The key here is that it's somebody else's money. In the scenario I just gave you, it's the parent's money. It's not the disabled person's money. We have somebody, a third party, could be parents, could be grandparents, setting up this trust for the benefit of the disabled person. All right, so, you know, the typical estate plan for parents is, if I die, I'm going to leave all my money to my two children in equal shares. For parents with a disabled child who needs to do special needs planning, they will also say in their estate plan, and the share for my disabled child will be held in a special needs trust. So that's the very most common. That's what we are doing. Special needs trust planning is most often parents planning for their children to make sure that they get the government benefits that they need, and also have this extra money, not making them ineligible for their government benefit. Now, the important distinction between a third party and a first party is the first party special needs trust is not somebody else's money. It's the money of the disabled person. We have a disabled person who has a bunch of money. Having that money is going to make them ineligible for their government benefits, their SSI, their Medicaid. Remember I said, you can have a car, you can have a house, you can have $2,000, and that's pretty much it. If you suddenly had $500,000 sitting in a bank account, you would lose all those benefits. And then you'd have to start spending that $500,000 on the things that the government benefit used to pay for. So that money's not going to last very long. So we have the ability to create a special needs trust with the money of the disabled person, because of this federal government policy in favor of making sure disabled people are cared for and supported and live their best possible lives. We want them to have this extra money because we know that SSI is just not enough. So we are allowed to create what's called a first party special needs trust with the money that belongs to the disabled person. And how does that happen? Well, the typical scenario is the disabled person is in a lawsuit and they get a judgment or they get a settlement, and the defendant pays them a big chunk of money. Suddenly they have this money. This is not something you can really plan for. You didn't know you were going to get in a car accident and you were going to sue somebody and you were going to get a big chunk of money. So the first party special needs trusts are they're like a cleanup tool. We're going to save this situation by creating a first party special needs trust. Third party, the parents set this up because they're planning ahead the first party, we gotta deal with a mess. It's not great. It's good, but it's not great. And it's important to remember that, planning ahead is always cheaper than cleaning up the mess afterwards. And I want to make sure that you understand the distinction between first and third is not inheritance. It's who has the money. So I'm going to tell you an example from my practice that we're working on right now. I have a client, her name is Kathy, and her brother recently died, her brother Steve. Steve did not have an estate plan, which is not great. That's not what I like to see. But Steve had only one child, Philip. So Philip will inherit everything. That's the law in California. Even if he didn't have an estate plan, he will inherit from Steve. And Steve's estate is about $500,000, give or take. So Philip is Kathy's nephew, and he's going to inherit this estate, but Philip is disabled, and Philip receives SSI, and Philip is on Medi-Cal, and he needs those benefits. This is very important to him, and now he has inherited almost $500,000 from his dad, so now he's not eligible for those benefits anymore. He has more than house, car, $2,000. So we're going to have to set up a first-party special needs trust for Philip, because the minute his father, Steve, died, that $500,000 belonged to Philip. And there, I remember I told you there was no estate plan, so there is no third-party special needs trust that was set up in advance. But fortunately, we are able to do a first-party special needs trust. There's a distinction between the first and the third, which is of significance. Third-party special needs trust, we can write all kinds of things that we want to. In the first party, we're kind of limited. There are very strict rules about how you set them up, who can set them up. And the most important rule about them is that when the beneficiary of the special needs trust dies, the first party special needs trust, the government gets paid back for the Medicaid benefits that were spent on this beneficiary. So, and that's true in California. I am assuming it's true in all of the other states. We call that estate recovery. Medicaid is entitled to be reimbursed, and they can do that with a first party special needs trust. They cannot do that with a third party special needs trust. So with a third party, if Steve had set up a third party special needs trust for Philip, when Philip died, that money could go to another family member. It could go to a charity. It could go wherever Steve wanted it to go. But with the first party, which is what I'm going to have to do for Philip, it first has to go back to Medi-Cal. And then if there's anything left, it'll go wherever we decide it will go. Okay, so the first party, as I said, first party is good, not great. It's a situation that you can't plan for, but it's fortunate we have this federal policy that allows us to do it. Okay, so finally, we are going to, now you have the background, now you understand the basics that you need to understand in order to understand the need for a special needs trust and how it works. So we have, in every trust, we have a number of different functions and people and categories. So I'm going to talk to you about this. It's kind of trust basics, but special needs trusts are very different. Every trust has a grantor. The grantor is the person who creates the trust and puts the money into the trust. So in a third-party special needs trust, that's typically the parents or the grandparents or some other family member. Every trust has a beneficiary. In the case of my client, that's going to be Philip. He will be the beneficiary, meaning that trust is there for his benefit. Every trust has a trustee. That is the person whose job it is to maintain those trust assets, to invest them carefully, and to make distributions and not make distributions that will make the beneficiary ineligible for their benefits. So those three roles exist in every trust: grantor, beneficiary, trustee. The trustee's job in a special needs trust is a little bit more difficult and challenging, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Every trust tells us what are we allowed to make distributions for. And in a special needs trust, we want to make sure that we spell out very clearly, we are not making distributions that will make our beneficiary ineligible for their government benefits. So the trustee's job is very complicated because they have to understand, obviously, the SSI rules, the Medicaid rules, all of that eligibility stuff. They also have to be good at investing the assets, because remember, a lot of times these special needs trusts have to last for a long time, and we've got to make the money last. So the trustee's job is very important, and we often see professional trustees. In California, we have what's called a licensed professional fiduciary, and I think in some other states they have something similar to that. Oftentimes these special needs trusts are administered. In other words, the trustee is a professional who understands the laws, understands how to manage money, and knows not how to avoid making disqualifying distributions. I'm going to mention again, I have a podcast, and in one of the episodes, I was talking to a licensed professional fiduciary who specializes in special needs trusts, and it's very interesting to hear him talk. And if you hear that episode, you'll really come to appreciate just how difficult a job that is. Okay, so we have distributions. Remember, distributions are going to be considered income by Social Security. We go back to that slide that had the three blocks on it. We had the unearned income, the earned income, and the in-kind support and maintenance. So if the trustee makes a distribution, gives the beneficiary $100, that's considered what? That's considered unearned income. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but you have to be aware of the consequences, and you have to plan and do that mindfully. If the trustee pays for the beneficiary's housing, the trustee pays the rent for the beneficiary, that's going to be considered income. That's in-kind support and maintenance. I'm not saying don't do it, and oftentimes we do that, because remember, the in-kind support and maintenance only reduces the benefit a little bit. But we always want to be mindful of what kind of distributions we're making and how, and be careful and keep in mind those benefits. Okay, so the main thing usually is we want to make sure that we don't lose the Medicaid. So we don't want to reduce the SSI to zero, and that is the trustee's job. Okay, so and in the in-kind support and maintenance, it might actually make sense to reduce the SSI down to that maximum reduction, because it allows the beneficiary to have a better life. If we can pay the rent and the beneficiary can live in a nicer apartment or a nicer home, we're okay with losing that benefit. Okay, so it's also important to remember that there are no reductions in the SSI benefit for things that are not cash and are not in-kind support and maintenance. So for example, if the trustee buys a cell phone for the beneficiary, or the trustee pays the monthly cell phone bill, that's not food, that's not shelter. He's not giving the cash to the beneficiary. So those are the kinds of things that special needs trusts can do. And so that's how we make this government benefit plus the extra private cash work together to give our beneficiaries, our disabled people, the best possible lives that we can. There's just a couple of more things I'm going to cover. Things that we do in special needs trusts that we don't typically do in other trusts. We usually will have a trust protector. The trust protector could be a family member, a friend, a trusted advisor. Their job typically is to amend or modify the special needs trust if that becomes necessary. So remember, these trusts have to comply with all the rules and regulations around SSI and Medicaid. And those rules and regulations change from time to time. So we need someone who can go in there and change the terms of the trust if we have to, if the law changes. And that is the job of the trust protector. And that is not a job that we have in every trust, but in a special needs trust, we definitely want that. Another job in a special needs trust could be a trust advisor or an advisory committee. And they tend to be friends and family members who know the beneficiary very well. And when we have a professional trustee, they really don't know the beneficiary very well. So we need to have somebody who can give the trustee guidance based on what they know about the beneficiary. And that can be very important. The other important role of either a trust protector or a trust advisor, every year the trustee has to provide an accounting to the beneficiary. It has to show the beneficiary what they've been spending money on, how the investments are doing. If we have a beneficiary who's disabled in such a way that they can't read the accounting, they can't understand the accounting, we need somebody else looking at that accounting just to make sure that our trustee is doing a good job. So we oftentimes in the trust, we will say, trustee, you have to provide an accounting to our trust advisor or our trust advisory committee. So that's the role of those folks. The last thing I want to talk to you about is not a legal document. It's, we call it a letter of intent in my office. And I encourage all of my, my grantors, usually parents, who are familiar with the disabled person to write a letter of intent, and it's meant to be sort of everything you need to know about this beneficiary. It could be talking about medication, it could be talking about diagnoses, it could be talking about favorite foods, it could be talking about favorite activities, favorite friends, anything you think somebody else would benefit by knowing about your disabled person. And we have a guide on our website, which is, it helps you create your own letter of intent. If anybody wants that, you can email me, you can put that in the Q&A. You can go to my website and get it directly. So I'm going to give you, here's my, as promised, my email address. If there's something I talked about today that you want to get from me or you want to ask me about, send me an email. You can go to my website. We have lots of special needs resources. I'm happy to share all of that with you. So I think now I am going into the Q&A, which I guess I have to stop sharing to find that. Oh, there we go. Okay. Q&A. Okay, so in one of the comments, I guess, is a better way of putting it. In 37 states, a person with cystic fibrosis does not need to have SSI to get Medicaid or Medi-Cal. If the person is low income, the person can get Medicaid. Yeah, and that is true. You also in California, you can be on Medi-Cal just by virtue of having low income. That is true. In most states, SSI is $783. Okay, so there you go. As I said, in California, we get a little bit of a bump, probably because it's so dang expensive to live here. Okay, now I have a question. If a special needs trust is used to pay for food or housing, would this jeopardize the trust designation as a special needs trust? Okay, so yes and no. It wouldn't jeopardize the trust designation as special needs trust, I guess, is the answer. It just means that the benefit, the SSI benefit, gets reduced. As I said, sometimes that's a strategic decision. Do I not make this distribution? Do I not pay this rent on this more expensive apartment and make my beneficiary live off of the $783 a month? Or do I go ahead and pay rent on a nicer place, and knowing I'm going to reduce the SSI benefit a little bit? That's a calculation that the trustee has to make, but it doesn't make it not a special needs trust. Is there a minimum amount to start a special needs trust? Oh, that's a good question. I wouldn't say there's a minimum amount, but there's an amount below which it might not make a lot of sense. So in California, at least, we have what's called a pooled trust, and oftentimes that's a good way to go for amounts of money that are, I'd say, if the amount of money we're talking about is less than $100,000, it might make sense to look at a pooled trust. And so that's a trust it's already set up. They're usually by a nonprofit organization, and you can join it, and they administer it. They invest the money for you. They take a fee. It's not cheap, but on the flip side, you avoid spending all that money to create a special needs trust. So I guess I would say maybe $100,000, it's worth looking at it. And it might not make sense to spend several $1,000s to set up a special needs trust. It also depends on how long this trust needs to last, who you have to serve as a trustee. If you're paying a trustee a lot of money to administer it, that will eat into that $100,000 too. So hopefully that answer, although it was very waffly, was a very much of it depends answer. I hope that gives you a little guidance. I'm going to look in the chat just to make sure there aren't any questions. I think that's all the questions. So I think that we can, if there aren't any more questions, Siri, do you want to come on?
Well, I'll ask just one final question. And if this was asked in a different way, forgive me, but what would be the strongest argument for setting one up, and an argument where it might be better to hold? Is it really, I guess, for it's my own clarity, you have this chunk of money, and I'm thinking in either situation, you've received it because of an accident in a lawsuit, or because the parents are doing this financial planning. Is there a time when that could make it challenging for the person to access that money? Is there any argument against it? Or I'm just curious. I've heard people on both sides of the coin. And I will say, as the parent of a young adult with CF, I'm curious. I have not set something up, so I'm pondering the options here.
Sure. As with almost everything here, it depends so much on the situation, but it does mean, if you're going to have a special needs trust, the beneficiary of that trust their hands are not on that money. They can't access it. They can't demand it. They have no right to it. The trustee can do things, but they can't force the trustee to give them $500. So that's a consideration. I would say the thing that drives it really is the ability to access government benefits if you need to. As I said, you can usually choose not to access the government benefits. You can do that, and then it's just a trust. But if you need to, and so that's really, I think, the compelling thing is thinking about, is it possible that we're ever going to need Medicaid? Is it possible? If it is, we better take a serious look at this.
That is very helpful. And okay. At least for me, and many maybe for the people who are listening today, quite often the more you know, the more you then start to know what to ask.
Right.
And so it might be that people are absorbing this and questions will emerge. So are you willing, if people do have questions to submit later, obviously your website is there so people can
Sure.
follow you and listen to your blogs, but if they should email us, can I direct them to you?
Oh,
and
yeah,
should
absolutely.
get these
Yeah,
questions answered?
yeah.
So,
I'm very happy to answer questions. So, yeah.
well, I have to say, on behalf of CFRI and on behalf of our CF community, I am so grateful to you for sharing your time and your expertise and educating us about special needs trusts and all the things to consider before you get to that point of deciding. So I thank you, and I also again thank Global Genes for the grant that made this possible. For those of you who are listening, this is being recorded. We will be posting it on our YouTube channel in about a week. So you can go back to refresh if there are things you're not sure you caught. You can go back and catch it then. Kirsten, I am so grateful to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're very kind, and it was my pleasure. Thank you.